There is no good time to talk about Mr. Epstein and all things associated.
Some scandals explode overnight, and some rot quietly behind palace walls for decades until the people who witnessed everything simply refuse to stay silent anymore. The gates are closed, the chandeliers are dim, and inside one of the most historic royal residences in Britain, something unthinkable has happened. Staff members, the same staff trained their entire lives to protect royal secrets, are quietly walking away, not transferred, not dismissed. They are refusing to stay. And when the people whose job is silence finally walk out, it means something inside the palace has gone terribly wrong. For generations, royal staff have lived by an unwritten rule: you see everything, you say nothing. These are people conditioned to guard secrets with their lives. Footmen, maids, butlers, aides, individuals who have served kings, queens, princes, and scandals that never reach the public. Their loyalty isn't just professional, it is cultural, institutional, absolute, which is exactly why what is happening now is sending quiet shockwaves through royal circles. Because these same people are refusing to serve one man. And that man is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. No titles, no royal duties, no official standing. Just a name now, and a story that insiders claim is far darker than the public has ever been allowed to see. For years, the public conversation around Andrew has focused on one explosive word: Epstein. The disgraced financier whose web of power, money, and abuse pulled in figures from around the world. That association alone nearly collapsed Andrew's royal life. The infamous BBC interview, the sweating explanation, the Pizza Express alibi, the catastrophic public reaction. Within days, his reputation shattered like glass. But insiders now suggest that was only the surface. What palace staff allegedly experienced behind closed doors paints a picture far more unsettling. Not a single scandal, but a pattern, a culture, a mindset that insiders say grew unchecked for decades. And the man now breaking the silence is someone who knows the palace better than almost anyone alive. Paul Burrell. If that name sounds familiar, it should. Burrell spent over 20 years inside the royal household. Not on the sidelines, but at the heart of it. He served as footman to Queen Elizabeth II herself. Later, he became butler to the Prince of Wales. And eventually, he became one of the most trusted figures in Princess Diana's life during the most turbulent years of her marriage and global fame. Burrell was there for everything: the quiet moments, the whispered arguments, the emotional breakdowns, the palace politics the public never saw. For years, he guarded those memories with the same discipline expected of every royal servant. Until now, at 67 years old, he is preparing to release a new memoir, one that insiders say goes further than anything he has ever revealed before. The book promises to pull the curtain back on what life inside the royal machine truly looked like. And Andrew sits squarely at the center of the storm. But the most unsettling part of Burrell's account isn't simply what Andrew allegedly did. It's how long it was allowed to happen. According to Burrell, the story doesn't begin with scandal. It begins with protection. Specifically, the protection of a mother whose power eclipsed every rule inside the institution. Queen Elizabeth II, the most respected monarch of modern times. A woman whose image represented discipline, stability, and duty above all else. Yet, within the palace walls, Burrell suggests something very different may have shaped Andrew's upbringing: indulgence. Andrew was born years after Charles and Anne, when Elizabeth was already firmly established on the throne. By then, the rigid royal parenting style had softened. Boundaries loosened, access widened, and according to insiders, Andrew grew up learning something subtle but dangerous. Rules could bend. Protocols existed for everyone else, but Andrew knew how to bypass them. Prince Philip tried to enforce structure. Palace procedure dictated how even royal children approached the queen. There were systems, channels, hierarchy. Andrew walked straight around them. And when a child learns early that consequences never arrive, something fundamental changes. Discipline never develops. Limits never solidify. Accountability becomes optional. Over time, insiders say that absence of boundaries hardened into entitlement. Burrell recalls witnessing behavior that stunned even seasoned palace staff. Dismissive language. Orders barked without courtesy. Servants treated less like professionals and more like obstacles. Moments where basic human respect seemed to disappear entirely. But the real issue wasn't occasional arrogance. It was repetition. Late-night gatherings that stretched deep past midnight. Staff expected to remain on duty long after their shifts ended. Entire teams kept awake simply because a prince wanted the evening to continue. Complaints quietly circulated through palace corridors, but addressing them inside an institution built on hierarchy proved nearly impossible. Until eventually the complaints reached the highest authority in the palace, the queen herself. Think about the magnitude of that moment. The monarch of the United Kingdom personally stepping in to address how her own son treated the people who served him. That alone reveals how far the situation had escalated behind the scenes. But according to insiders, the intervention didn't lead to reflection. It led to adaptation. Instead of changing behavior, Andrew and his then-wife, Sarah Ferguson, allegedly began finding ways around the correction. Restrictions on staff entering their private chambers, extended mornings in bed that complicated daily schedules, household routines disrupted simply to reassert control over the system. To outside observers, it might sound petty. Inside the palace, it meant something else entirely. It signaled that even direct correction from the queen herself could be sidestepped. And once that realization settles into someone's worldview, the psychological consequences can be enormous. A person begins to operate as though the rules of consequence simply don't apply to them. Looking back now, many insiders believe that mindset explains everything that followed. The friendships, the disastrous interviews, the investigations that refuse to fade away. But the story doesn't end with Andrew alone, because another figure sits quietly beside him in this strange royal equation, Sarah Ferguson. And understanding her role reveals something even more unsettling about how unchecked privilege can evolve inside the palace walls. No visible recognition of the suffering surrounding the scandal. Instead, he framed a visit to Epstein after the financier's release from prison as an act of personal honor, explaining that he felt it was the honorable thing to end the friendship in person. The reaction from crisis management experts was immediate and brutal. Communication specialists called it one of the worst public interviews ever delivered by a figure of power. Royal commentators described it as catastrophic. Within days, Andrew stepped back from royal duties. Within weeks, it became obvious the damage could not be repaired. But what fascinated analysts was not just the interview itself. It was the mindset behind it. A man who had lived his entire life inside protective institutional walls walked into a global broadcast and behaved as though the same protections still existed, as though public scrutiny would simply bend around him the way palace protocol always had. For the first time in his life, the system did not shield him, and the collapse was immediate. From that moment forward, Andrew's royal position began to unravel piece by piece. Investigations intensified, documents surfaced, questions grew louder. One particularly troubling thread involves a 2011 email reportedly connected to a Metropolitan Police investigation. According to reports, the message suggested Andrew had instructed his police bodyguard to gather personal information about Virginia Giuffre, the woman accusing him. Details allegedly included her social security number and date of birth. Whether the request was fulfilled remains unclear, but the implication alone raised enormous questions about the possible use of public law enforcement resources for personal defense. If accurate, it would represent a serious abuse of privilege. And the story did not stop there. Separate documents examined by journalists suggested that during Andrew's time as the UK's special representative for international trade and investment, he may have shared sensitive information from an official Southeast Asia trade mission with Epstein. These reports were said to appear within the vast collection of files released by the United States Department of Justice related to the Epstein investigation. That possibility transformed the conversation entirely, because now the story was no longer limited to personal conduct or royal embarrassment. It touched on national security, the potential sharing of confidential government information with a convicted sex offender connected to powerful international networks. Andrew has denied all accusations. The investigations remain ongoing, but the atmosphere inside the royal household has shifted dramatically regardless of legal outcomes. Staff members who once served without question have quietly begun refusing assignments involving Andrew. Palace insiders describe an environment of deep discomfort surrounding his residence at Royal Lodge. For an institution where loyalty and silence are considered sacred professional duties, this level of internal resistance is almost unheard of. It represents something close to an institutional verdict, and that verdict has placed King Charles III in one of the most difficult positions any monarch could face. As king, Charles carries the responsibility of protecting the monarchy's credibility and public trust. But as a brother, he is watching the public collapse of someone who shared his childhood and family history. Despite that emotional complexity, Charles has taken decisive steps. Andrew's remaining royal titles were stripped in October 2025. Palace communications support was withdrawn. The official message became clear: Andrew no longer represents the crown in any capacity. Yet, even that decisive action raises uncomfortable questions about the system that allowed events to reach this point. Why did accountability take so long? Why did it require global scandal, media disaster, and police investigations before the institution finally drew a permanent line? Paul Burrell's memoir forces those questions into the open, not just about Andrew as an individual, but about the environment that protected him for decades. The culture of silence, the assumption that rank could override responsibility, the unspoken belief that certain figures were simply beyond consequence. The people most affected by that culture were not princes or politicians. They were the staff members whose voices rarely enter royal history books, the maids who were blocked from performing their duties, the footmen who endured insults because hierarchy demanded obedience. His swift removal removal of Andrew from royal duties was not only about discipline, it was about survival, preserving the legitimacy of an institution older than most modern nations. Yet even decisive action cannot erase decades of accumulated questions. The deeper issue exposed by Burrell's revelations is structural. How did a man operate inside the royal system for so long without meaningful correction? What mechanisms of deference and silence allowed troubling patterns to continue unchecked? These are the questions that now linger over the monarchy's future. The police investigation remains open. The allegations remain contested. Andrew continues to deny wrongdoing. But one reality is undeniable. The protective architecture that once surrounded him has been dismantled piece by piece. The queen who shielded him is gone. His titles are gone. Palace support is gone. Staff loyalty is dissolving. And now insiders who once guarded royal secrets are beginning to speak. When those who lived inside the system finally decide the truth matters more than silence, something historic is happening. The story unfolding now is not just about Andrew. It is about the limits of power itself. Because even the most protected figures eventually reach the edge of the system that sustained them. Even the most disciplined institutions eventually confront the consequences of what they tolerated. And when the whispers inside palace corridors finally become public testimony, the question that remains is not simply what Andrew did. The real question is how long everyone else knew, and why it took so many years for the silence to finally break.